Testing. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone's enjoying themselves. Just in case you don't know, we do have free Wi-Fi. And if you're on Twitter, hashtag BETT2020. Okay, without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce James Browning here. And the title of his presentation is 5 Simple Steps for a Successful EdTech Strategy. So if you join me in a round of applause and welcoming James, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Let me start by saying thank you to the rent-a-crowd order that clearly arrived. I really appreciate you coming. On a really serious note, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here talking to you about 5 simple steps towards a successful EdTech strategy. No fancy frameworks here, no complications, just very, very simple back to basics in my personal view and some kind of input into that as to what could lead to a successful EdTech strategy for you. On that note, before I go any further, I thought I might start with a bit of audience participation, just so I can make sure I get my messages right. Would you mind raising your hand if you are a teacher? Lovely, thank you. If you're a senior leader? Lovely, thank you. If you're a technology lead or network manager? And if you're a governor or trustee or parent? So the simple answer is we've got a lovely cross-section of stakeholders from the school, which I think is absolutely perfect. The next bit of good news is that there's a bit of bonus content for you coming up as well. So in addition to the 5 simple steps that we're going to go through, we're also going to talk about what I consider to be the building blocks of a technology strategy from a tech perspective. So we'll cover that towards the end. That's the things that I consider the critical foundations when you go forth and implement your strategy. So before we go any further as well, I want to try and just put a bit of a case to you as to why it's worthwhile sticking around for the next 30 minutes. So I work for a company called RM. RM's been around just over 45 years now, and throughout that time, it's changed and evolved, but the one thing that is absolutely common is that it's focused on UK schools, education technology, and trying to make a difference to those schools in teaching and learning. I myself have been with RM for 13 years. I've had the joy of working through a number of different roles. For me, the role that's contributed to the most passion to this particular presentation is that I spent 4 years out with schools every single day, working with them on EdTech strategy, particularly in this area of London, actually. But I also wear a second hat, and my second hat is that outside of work, I'm a trustee for a local trust near to where I live. It's called Abingdon Learning Trust. We're a small trust. We're quite unusual, actually, because we formed starting as a primary school, and we then grew and added 2 secondary schools. So quite unusual in that respect. But I think we're also typical in some respects because we've been on a bit of a journey to help define our technology vision. And so I'm going to bring out some of that experience with my ALT, Abingdon Learning Trust, hat on at times as well. Through the presentation, I'll try and give reference to where I've been through that experience personally, and also where I've come across experience with other schools. So, without further ado, these are the 5 steps that I'm going to talk to you about. I'm not going to dwell upon those right now because I'm now going to go into a little bit more detail on each of those. If you don't manage to get a picture, wow, it's amazing, all the phones coming at you. If you don't manage to get a picture, don't worry. I've got the classic, tell you what I'm going to tell you, then I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to show you at the end, I'm going to tell you again. So these are the 5 steps. Without further ado, let's start at number 1. Number 1 is actually about taking a step back and away from technology altogether. And I know that can seem slightly strange coming from a technologist like myself, but I think it's absolutely critical for you as a school or as a trust or whatever educational establishment you are to take a step back and think about where you're going. Think about your vision. And if a vision is a bit of a grand word that you're not too comfortable with, just break that down into what you really want to achieve as a school. Use your reference points, whether that be your Ofsted report, your attendance, your behavior patterns, to really focus in on the things that matter to you without even considering the technology. Such an important step because then you can make sure the technology that you choose and the path that you choose underpins that direction of travel. My firm recommendation to do that, and you may already have these kind of forums in place, is to form a working group. And it's really, really recommended that that working group represents a cross-section of your school. Think about the different layers, the different stakeholders, the different users, if you like, that touch technology. And I do thoroughly recommend including students in that as well. And you will often find that the best ideas, the most ambition comes from those students themselves. So whether you get them together in a workshop manner, you start to get input from all those different stakeholders, what you should hopefully come out of this first step with is a really clear view of where you want to go, if you don't know already, as a school, as a trust. The next couple of steps are about baselining your understanding from a staff engagement and a technology perspective. The first of those is staff engagement. And this is about getting a really clear understanding for where your staff are at in their ability to use technology, but also their willingness to use technology. We did a bit of research within RM just a couple of months ago, and we surveyed schools on their willingness and their confidence in technology. And staggeringly, 39% said they are somewhat, or in many cases, very unconfident with technology. And when we went on to later survey them about how much they think technology is going to play a role in changing their school, a staggering 75% said that they thought it would make a difference. So when you take those two stats together, you think, well, something's got to change. But for your particular school, I really recommend getting into the detail about your people. And if you get the kind of results or the questions really thought through properly, what you can do is you can start to map their skills onto their willingness to actually engage with that technology. And then you can start to form groups of people that maybe can be contributory to your strategy. For example, you may have technology experts right at the top of that spectrum. And that may go down to those that want to consider engaging in technology. You might have those that have got confidence, but actually they don't necessarily have the underlying skills. And equally, you might have those who've got skills, but they don't actually use them in the workplace because maybe they've had some bad experiences from a confidence perspective. Getting this baseline of understanding is particularly critical when it comes through to the perspective of actually how do we go and implement technology changes. I'll come back to that. The third step is about moving into the world of technology itself and getting a similar baseline for your technology foundations. What I mean by that is understanding what you've got today. It is unrealistic to start with a blank canvas. And actually, from a financial, efficiency, and general adoption perspective, you need to take consideration to this. So whether you use your own in-house expertise, maybe your technology leads, your network managers, or whether you look to others such as RM to help with this, getting this understanding is critical. Because you don't just want to throw out all the investment you've already got. Then you can start to consider how you might bring some of those devices back to life. You might start to consider how you can make sure you're maximizing your investment in the servers that you've currently got. And equally, you can start to get a feel for where there are parts of the school that maybe are pushing on, using some exciting technologies just because they're not going to wait for the rest of the school to catch up with them. So that level of understanding is really important. I would recommend pulling those two things together and then looking at them along side by side, which very neatly slots into number 4, which is about bringing those things together. It's about trying to bring that into a well-articulated strategy. And this is a big one. Lots of folk get really, really penned up with, we must have a strategy document, something that represents our strategy, a paper that I can put on our website, I can publish it, and that can be really important. It certainly is a good tool to get a common understanding of what your strategy is. My recommendation, however, is to really, really think about engagement over and above what might be a shiny strategy document. Get your working group back together. Get them to review those the second and third step, the staff engagement summary and the technical audits, and then really think about where you want to go. And I cannot stress heavily enough, giving consideration to the communications plan, the change plan in itself has a whole new world to explore. If you're interested in that, by the way, that change management piece, on our stand at 3 o'clock today, we'll be giving a talk dedicated to change in the individual, which is just around the corner. So if you're really interested in that level of detail about how we go out and we manage that change management, I firmly recommend that. So we've rattled through 4 steps there pretty quickly. Then what I would hope you get out the back of that is a clear view of that technology strategy, underpinned by where you want to go as an overall vision. And now you might start to consider, okay, what are our first steps? Which is when we start to get into the bonus footage that I mentioned at the start of the deck. So step 5 is to start to lay your foundations, your technology foundations. I really recommend that you take a step back from what can sometimes be the shiny, sometimes be the exciting, and really consider getting your foundations right. Because if you get these foundations right, they effectively form a concrete level of confidence of your exciting technology, your end-facing technology really hitting home and helping to meet your objectives. What I'm going to do now is take you through what I believe those 5 building blocks are. I will caveat this with the fact that I absolutely recognize every school is different, every trust is different, and the building blocks can vary. But these are just, in my personal experience, what are often seen as that common layer of building block. So the first of these is to really consider your expertise from a technology perspective. Think about what you've got in-house at the moment. Ask yourself the honest question of whether you've got the right technology expertise to go and deliver the strategy you've just defined. And then complement those expertise with the right external support. Now you might say, well, I would say that. I'm from a company that provides exactly that. But this comes from personal experience working in the trust, where we did try and move forward without the right external support. And the other thing to note as well is building a trust and a relationship between whether that be the in-house expertise or the external, where you can have an open conversation. You don't get penned down with things like, for example, job protection or considerations for how that person's role might evolve. Build a really solid relationship, whether the internal or external party you're working with. The second building block comes back to that staff survey, that staff engagement that I mentioned. Just as a really broad brush stat, I would recommend ring fencing around about 20% of all of your technology budget to contribute to what I'll call change. That could be training, that could be CPD, that could be the art of change management. So many technology strategies, and I would argue probably the overwhelming majority of strategies that do struggle because of this second building block. Because they haven't got that staff engagement right, they haven't got the skill level right. They provided some great technology, but there isn't the right support there to then go and make that strategy a success. The third building block is to choose a consistent platform. What do I mean by platform? Well, I mean a couple of things, really. I mean your underlying technology that runs the heart of your school. In the first instance, I mean a management information system. I mean that you commit to an MIS, that it's your single point of data, and this is particularly true if you're a trust. I thoroughly recommend having a single point of data that absolutely underpins where you're going. When I also talk about platform, I also mean considering your collaboration platform. And in the main, I mean Office 365 or Google. I, once again, thoroughly recommend choosing a single platform and committing to it. Don't get too penned down in where those platforms are at today. Think about where you think those platforms are going. Go and engage with Microsoft and Google at the show today if you haven't already, and get a feeling for where you think that's heading and how that aligns to your view of your future, and commit to that. Of course, change can come in the long run, but what I really do not recommend is a mixed estate. It's something that us at RM we have toyed with over the past, is allowing customers to use a combination of both, but committing to one allows you to really invest in it, build out technology from that point. The fourth building block is about getting the right infrastructure to support you. So it's great if you've got some great platforms, it's great if you've got engaged staff, but if you've not got the right resilience in your infrastructure, then you will really struggle to actually get that technology to work for you. And in the main, I'm talking about connectivity here, but I'm also talking about more than a fat pipe going into your school that gives you nice, fast internet. I'm talking about the things around that. Think about things like your telephony, whether you're using voice over IP, or thinking about quality of service, how your embracing of technology over time is going to put demands on that quality of service. Think about your wireless. Think about if you're rolling out new devices, how is it going to cope with that? It's a really important point, and of all the building blocks, it's the one to think into the future as much as possible, because making the investment now to future-proof you is really key, not just making it fit for purpose today. And the last one is to think about your safeguarding responsibilities. Cannot stress enough just how important it is to think about, if you like, balancing the excitement of technology with your responsibilities from a safeguarding perspective. Make sure, of course, your designated safeguarding lead is up with things like keeping children safe in education, really up with the way in which that direction of travel is heading, and you feel like you've got a good handle on your responsibilities from a safeguarding perspective in the technology space. Have you got the right filtering solution, but also are you putting the right monitoring solution in place across the technology layers we've just talked about? And I wouldn't recommend just pinning that on your designated safeguarding lead. Make sure that's rolled out throughout your school. Make sure that's really well understood. Because in an ideal world, once you get through these building blocks, you've got staff across your school, across your estate, really embracing in technology, which is fantastic in so many ways, but it also does put stress on that safeguarding piece. So that's my 5 building blocks. I'm now going to give you an opportunity just to reflect on these 5 simple steps that I've talked through. So number 1, be really clear about your overall vision. Don't get bogged down by the technology. Really think about where you're heading. Number 2, assess staff engagement from an adoption perspective and from a skills perspective. Number 3, assess your technology foundations by auditing really clearly. Make it absolutely well understood on what you've got today and how you might be able to use that. Don't just throw it out and start again. Number 4, really think about bringing that together into an articulated strategy that can be communicated well. Don't get bogged down with just putting something on paper and putting it on your website. Think about that change plan. Think about pushing it out really clearly. And number 5, go back to those building blocks. Of course, these slides will be made available to you so you can see those building blocks. But there is an opportunity to continue the conversation. If you are interested in picking up on those topics, I really recommend coming over and having a chat to us on the stand. We're just on NL56, which is literally a stone's throw from here. The other thing to note is that we have on offer a package which can take you through the processes I've just outlined, and it's worth in the region of £4,000. So we'll be doing that by a prize draw at the end of the BETT show. You can pop over and see us and get registered for that. It's just a short survey. But equally, you can just tag us, if you've not got time, you can tag us on Twitter, tag a staff member, and you'll be entered into the draw as well. I think we've actually got a bit of time now, and I was hoping that might be the case. So I believe they've got a mic at the back, and I would really welcome any engagement from the audience, any questions that come. Question at the front.
Testing. Hi, thank you. So you said that you recommend not having a mixed system, which is actually what we've got. What would your advice be to a school in that position?
Yeah. So the question for anybody that didn't hear it was, if you feel like you've got a mixed estate and you have got a mixed estate, what would my advice be in that position? So it's a very, very good question, because it's very common in my experience that schools may have got into that point, particularly if you've got very eager teachers that maybe have started using the likes of Google Classroom and maybe Office 365 is the main reference point as a tenancy. My advice is, first of all, and I know it sounds really obvious, engagement. Taking that resource away from the teacher that's really engaged in, let's say, for example, Google Classroom, could be a really painful thing. By engaging with those that are engaged in the, if you like, the rogue platform, you can have a conversation about what they really value about that. My experience is that the functionality you will get from both platforms, whilst different, can be very well comparable, and you can work through what's really important to them and to making sure you're replicating that and making it available in the other platform. So fundamentally, engagement, trying to take them on a bit of a journey. If you conclude that actually the functionality that they're working through, let's say Google Classroom, is really powerful for them, then try and revisit the drawing board. Should they be part of your working group? Should that be part of the consideration to your platform overall? Maybe there's some really valid input from that individual or that working group that could bring forward your choice in the future. I hope that helps. Any other questions?
Thank you. Sorry about my English. I'm from Spain. In my school, there are teachers who are not engaged with technology because they see that there are many different levels. We have teachers with a high level of management with electronic devices, new methodologies, and there are all teachers, sorry, with no, we are not motivated to use the technology, and we need to have a global plan to in which technology is concerned. So, what do you recommend? Would you have so many different kind of people in the same school?
So if I understood the question correctly, it's where you've got a particularly low level of engagement from your staff. You've got different stakeholders. Maybe they've got different reasons for their lack of willingness to engage. Maybe it's their age or where they're at. Yeah, I understand completely. So I think if you think about that axis of skills and adoption and start to really draw out a clarity of where people are at, it sounds like you're fairly confident that most people are down in the either low level of skill or low level of willingness to adopt. I would hasten to guess that there are at least some that are further up the axes, and they're your experts, if you like. So using them and empowering them to help others is one recommendation that I have. The other thing that I really recommend is to go back to basics and really understand what's important to them in their day-to-day lives. Quite often the technology can confuse and confuddle those that aren't well engaged. They're at the bottom of that axis. So once again, it's just about really understanding what's important to them. Maybe they're really frustrated with how long it takes them to do attendance in a morning. If you can provide some technology that can help them with those things that really frustrate them, really get in the way, that is often the journey started. They start to get that level of confidence in the technology. That's my recommendation, is just take them on the journey slowly.
Any more questions? Going, gone. Thank you very much.
Oh,
one more question here. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just in my capacity as a parent, really, of a student at a school where my perspective has been that there's a lot of potential. Any tips for how parents can maybe catalyze this process? In your experience, have you worked with any parents who've been able to do that?
Yes, so we, at the trust that I work with, we formed the working group that I mentioned, and we made parents part of that stakeholder group. Clearly, that was a choice by the trust, but I would recommend potentially propositioning that to the school to get that level of parent engagement, to try and get a feed of input. Because often those parents, just in the same way as governors and trustees, can give a perspective from industry, from outside. So that's often a good route. Is to try and give a formal input. I appreciate that will be asking the school to comply with that. So I wish you all the best with it. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So the next talk is at 1:15, okay? So thank you very much. Hello.
Sitting on the sill with